The concept is that of a structure called an arcology, or ecological architecture. Such a structure would take the place of the natural landscape. Man must make the metropolitan landscape in his own image, a physically compact, dense, three-dimensional, energetic bundle. The man-made landscape has to be a multi-level landscape, a solid of three congruous dimensions. Physical freedom, that is to say, true reaching power, is wrapped around vertical vectors. Arcology, instrumented by science and technology, will be an aestheto-compassionate phenomenon. Its advent will be the implosion of the flat megalopolis of today into an urban solid of super-dense and human vitality. The concept of a one-structure system is not incidental to the organization of the city, but central to it. It is the wholeness of a biological organism that is sought in the making of the city. Life is there where the flow of matter and energy is abundant and uninterrupted. With a great flow gradient, the city acquires a cybernetic character. It is much too late for our present generation, bound to the spell of arrogance and license. It may even be quite late for the just born, but there is hope for the children of our children. The when is now, for lack of any reachable yesterday. Hey, it's Andrew with the Isle of Misfit Books, where I share with you the books that have struck me and stuck with me in my 25 years of working in rare books. Today, we're going to be diving headfirst into Paolo Soleri's breathtakingly visionary 1969 masterpiece of utopian urban design, titled Arcology, the City in the Image of Man. I can't just flip it up. It's a behemoth. So I'm going to go get it and bring it over here to show it to you. It's going to fill the whole frame. So here it is, like I said, filling the frame. As you can see, it's a soft cover. It's bound with that crappy plastic toothed comb. It's so terrible, and it's because it's from 1970, it's extremely brittle at this point. So just in making this video, that happened. Little bits of the spine that just were so brittle they fell apart. So I hope you appreciate the sacrifice. If you do, please leave a like. I'm kidding, of course. It was bound to happen, if you see what I did there. When I sat down to start making this video, I thought this was going to be a pretty easy one to script and shoot. The designs for the arcologies are the thing that draws everybody to the book, and they're typically the thing that stick with you afterward as well. That was certainly the case for me. But it is an actual book, and the first third of the book is text, largely, with diagrams as opposed to architectural drawings and renderings. It really is Soleri's philosophy veering into manifesto. It's his arcosophy, if you will. The drawings then aren't so much actual literal designs and plans as much as they are visual representations of the underlying philosophy. So I do plan on getting into that and unpacking that a little bit, trying to convey to you as best I can, because it's pretty dense and convoluted, but to convey to you as best I can the underlying philosophy. But if you're not really interested in the philosophy, or it starts to get a little dry or abstract, and you just want to skip ahead to see the arcologies, the 30 arcologies, then I will put a timestamp here, and you can just click ahead to that at any point. My copy of the book is a 1970 second printing. It was first published in 1969. Both the first and second printings were published at the M.I.T. press in Massachusetts. After the first printing, there was an exhibition, a museum exhibit. I think it toured, but at any rate, that was pretty popular, made a splash, and that probably spiked the demand for a second printing. The first printing and the second printing from 69 and 70 are in that larger format. It's been reprinted over the years, but typically in a reduced format. All right, buckle up, here we go. It's a grandly utopian vision, and every utopia is an inherent criticism of the present day, right? Of the present day culture or environment or both. The criticism contained in his Arcology seems to me to be every bit as relevant today as it must have back then in the 60s. The results are not a blueprint for a city civilization, but only a guideline toward a new option. Each page, each very large page, is layered and complex. In that first third, you have these intricate diagrams stacked on top of Soleri's philosophical manifesto. The text explains the diagrams, and the diagrams illustrate the text. When you get to the actual drawings, each page features one specific design, but in the margins are other arcologies to give you a sense of the scale, as well as Soleri's sketches and textual notes. The design of the book in this way is so appropriate to one of Soleri's main themes, and that's miniaturization. It's right there on page 1. This book is about miniaturization, which seems like kind of a joke, right? Like, this book is massive. But what he means by miniaturization is packing as much as possible into the smallest footprint possible. And these pages definitely do that. There are 3 important concepts that are key to understanding Soleri's Arcology. The first is miniaturization. As he says at the outset, this book is about miniaturization. Again, miniaturization, I don't think it's quite the right word. I think it really is more densification. It's about shrinking our footprint. And that's what these 2 side-by-side diagrams of the North American continent are about, showing how if we can shrink our footprint on the Earth, that allows the ecology to expand because we're taking up less of it and covering less of it. And then on the right is his proposal, and I think this is what a lot of people miss about Arcology. The Arcologies, Soleri says, are really just either appendices or endpoints, starting points to what he describes as an urban river. Now, he doesn't have any designs for how these would be structured, but he does say the material presented here is a schematic reference to modular urban systems that find full coherence as appendices and as origins of the urban rivers, carriers of the bulk of civilization. So the Arcologies are not meant to support the bulk of human civilization. That is down to more of these line cities almost. To Soleri, miniaturization, shrinking the footprint, building up into 3 dimensions as opposed to spreading out and sprawling, that's the ideal. Another very important concept is reach, and you can see this described here. You have a section, sort of the side view, and then the plan, the overhead view. Reach is a measure of how much of the various components of a fulfilled life are easily and readily accessible. From living quarters to family, community, work, recreation, rest, play, sustenance, worship, whatever makes your life fulfilled, how easily accessible is that to you? He wanted people to be both living together, living closely together in community, in society, but with very easy access to the outdoors. Part of the Arcology is always large, open, park-like areas with lots of greenery, lots of plant life, farming even, that are accessible on your level, within walking distance. And you can see here, space radius, fraction of a mile, time radius, few minutes. Everything should be that close. I'm not an urban planner, so I don't know if reach is a concept that is already in urban planning and is old hat, but I think it's an interesting measure, an interesting way to think of your life. Arcology then is all about reach, and it's all about having the best of all worlds. So the metropolitan person is also the country person because it's all within reach. And you say that's impossible, but Soleri says, no, it's not, as long as we miniaturize the footprint of our urban areas, bring everything closer together and start thinking and building in 3 dimensions. And maybe there's something to this. I mean, this is sort of getting back to our roots as primates, even. This is how our closest cousins live. They live vertically. They move from the ground to the trees and back again very easily, very naturally. And the third important term is, or important concept in Soleri, is this idea of the aestheto-compassionate. Aesthetics are very important to him, as you might expect from an architect, but for him, the aesthetic is superior to the merely beautiful or pretty. The aesthetic is that which gets at the essence of a thing. So while an object that we make might be beautiful and might even be functional, it will only serve for a time before it becomes obsolete. No matter how practical, no matter how functional, or no matter how beautiful or fashionable, at some point that item, that thing that we've made, is going to become obsolete. Unless we build along aesthetic lines, and not just build, but create. And this is where creation comes in, creation superior to making. When we, as humans, create something along aesthetic lines, we're creating something that gets at the essence of that thing. And that will make it so that it never becomes obsolete because it is permanently useful to us. And this is creating the true essential form of a city and of a society, so that it inspires us to continue creating it and recreating it when it inevitably does become obsolete. It is a city that is both lively and lovely. Soleri writes, "Care is a first-person undertaking. The care of the citizen is the sap of the city. But one can care only for that which one loves. Lovableness is the key to a living city. A lovely city is not an accident, as a lovely person is not an accident." Are there negative reasons, things to avoid? I see three big ones. The first is megalopoly and suburbia. And these are sort of the opposite of miniaturization. These are the antithesis of arcology. They're anti-ecology. These are the two-dimensional, chaotic urban sprawls that splinter us and atomize us. They keep us trapped in two dimensions. They keep us stagnant and ultimately heading toward ecumenopoly, the planet-spanning city. The second would be atomization, and this is sort of the opposite of reach. This is anti-humane. Distance leads to separateness, leads to isolation, leads to alienation. Individualism at the expense of the collective leads to fragmentation, frustration, stagnation, and ultimately savagery and chaos. And third would be extravaganza. This is the opposite of aestheto-compassion. It is anti-fulfillment. This is construction without architecture, making rather than creating. This is the fashionable rather than the essential. Its whimsical moments cannot conceal the utter squalor of which it is cause and effect in one. Extravaganza is involution. This is the dark future with a technology for technology's sake, and the many grim pictures given in literature will never convey the total nightmare of its advent. The final point of Soleri's summary of his argument is a small section titled Arcology and Cybernation. And he writes, "The urban organism has a new tool on hand. It can delegate to a non-biological brain, i.e. a computer, some of its labors. Such a centralized brain cares for the collective and instrumental functions, while individual minds govern the pluralism inherent in the whole organism. Arcology is such an organism." Okay, so now we've gotten to the good part. Now we've gotten to the arcologies, and he presents 30. Unlike in the book, I'm going to present them to you in order of size, starting with the smallest and the simplest and working our way up to the largest and most complex, the largest of which, Babel Noah, is designed to house 6 million people. It looks like an Antarctic or Arctic research station. Behind it is Arc Canyon, just to give you a sense of scale. The hot desert of Sinai, like the hot desert of Arizona, is merciless toward anything or any space that cannot count on deep receptacles and great inertia mass. Cave dwelling is as old and as uninterrupted as the history of man. The combination of good layout, mouth preferably open to the south, good coordination of material and artificial light, good radiant and convection heat systems can make the whole cave a most exciting place to live and work in. The urban life must be brought to the farmer. The only way this is feasible is to maintain communities large enough to sustain and encourage urban institutions. As a miniaturized universe, it offers unending elements for surprise and stimulation. There will not be fenced-in playgrounds. The whole city is the place where the child is acting out the learning process, one aspect of which is play. Arcology is an environmental toy. And I would like to think that this encourages adults to keep on playing as well, to keep on exploring and surprising themselves. They would kind of be these mazes and labyrinths and that sort of thing. Hide and seek might be a game that people play well into their into their adult years. What else in construction beside bridges and other water-retaining structures can compare in forcefulness, size, purpose, grandeur? Certainly not our offices, palaces, theaters, libraries. This is an interesting view because it shows really 5 arcologies in close proximity forming a larger arcology. And you can see there are towers within the cave, presumably supporting the roof of the much larger cave required. And arcology is the ideal way to counteract difficult climatic conditions. The neocliff has also been turned upon itself to encircle a central park and define a sheltered volume. The focus of the farm area, the town, would afford its inhabitants a visual reach almost unlimited, bringing to them the immediate conscience of the seasonal cycles and the participation of man in the ecology of the earth. This might actually look about as close to Frank Lloyd Wright as anything we've seen. Frank Lloyd Wright was Soleri's mentor. Shortly after World War II, Soleri came to the US and he studied or apprenticed under Wright for I think about a year and a half before they kind of went their separate ways. And this might actually be getting pretty close to the urban rivers that he was talking about, housing the bulk of people in the country. Basically the lined city. That is what this is looking like to me. Arc beam is to be taken in the same context as stone bow, as one of the non-weakening links in the urban river stretching across continents, respectful of nature while not intimidated by its vastness and strength. There is then a profitable ground for learning about the cities of today by reflecting on the hypothetical and as yet unreal city asteroid. For it, the conditions are harsher, the problems more packaged, the survival success story more elemental, and the hypothesis slightly less human than one might desire. If we are not able to spark the imagination of man with powerful vision on those points where power is clustered manyfold, that is, the city, then we miss, not peripherally, but totally and centrally. This is the responsibility of power, and the shrinking from it is an irresponsible act. Infrababel is connected with 3 other smaller communities situated in cavern-like spaces on the cliffs of the canyon. This will make sense to those who have visited the West or possibly some places in the Far East. The 4 communities are connected by tunnels, bridges, and waterways. Soleri does acknowledge that, yes, these are not necessarily practical, but you could also point out that practical is really just the continuation of what we've been doing. How is that working out for us? How practical is that? And I think that's a valid counter to the argument that none of these are practical. Oh, this is my favorite, Stonebow. This is the community built as a bridge. Built above a ravine or a canyon. Stonebow shows how, even under extreme conditions, the concept of three-dimensionality can work. I just think this is beautiful. This would be basically a massive cylinder rising out of the flat land around it. He always has a skyscraper to scale on the side, so you can see it would just be a massive structure. The digas are all dam sites. These structures are begging for life. To introduce living and working into the masonry of the dam means to transform a monolithic, non-cellular system into one that is articulated and cellular. And he talks about some of the places like mining pits or quarries that are scars in the earth that have been used up, burned out, as being ideal places to insert an arcology and bring life back to them. Arcube and hexahedron, he writes, are in a way a second-generation arcology. I am including Arcube and hexahedron in this volume as the overture to a possible second volume. That would include the urban river referred to before, a second volume which I will point out never appeared. Soleri actually says that a passenger liner is the closest ancestor of arcology. He goes on to write, the common characteristics are compactness and definite boundary, the functional fullness of an organism designed for the care of many, if not most, of man's needs, and a definite, unmistakable three-dimensionality. Three main characteristics, on the other hand, are not common between the ocean liner and the arcology. The liner is structurally and functionally designed for motion within a fluid. The liner is a shell for a temporary society of unrelated people, and the liner is a sealed package connected to the outside only by way of synthetic information. I'm assuming that all included is also not part of an arcology, though if he pitched it that way, he might have gotten a lot more people on board. This is what's on the cover. A hyperstructure over 1 kilometer high and 2 kilometers in diameter at the bowl base. The top platform ground is for cultural institutions, schools, labs, studios, theaters, and libraries. Now we're starting to get into the hyperboloids. I think that's what those are called, which have the look of cooling towers. Obviously they're not cooling towers, but they do sort of look like that, which might have some negative connotations for some viewers. It would be a large-dimensioned sheltering device, fractioning three-dimensional space in large and small subspaces, making its own weather and its own cityscape. The spaces between each level or each performance would have to be massive, because you're essentially allowing weather to come in. You have to also provide ways for sunlight to come in, so you would have large, very tall, open spaces on all sides to allow weather to come in, but it would essentially make its own weather, its own shade, its own cooling system. For minds rightly turning, logology would be the quintessence of urbanity, of worldliness. If to be of the world is to have an almost physical awareness of the universal battle put up by life to affirm its own staying power. Because of the nature of the dam, there would be water, power, communication, roads, sport and leisure possibilities, powerful geologies, and the bulk of the giant wall desperately in quest of further meaning, a relevant example of a condition inviting complexification. High buoyancy canisters, funnel-shaped, with meridian ribs and horizontal compression rings. microcellular structure defining the microspaces for the different detailed activities. So it's kind of chaining together these smaller structures into one massive one. Conceptually, Babel Noah is the translation to contemporary terms of a village on stilts. The marshy ground has been transformed by a system of canals forming a network of arteries, mainly of leisure and open-air living character. Above this park, on stilts as large as skyscrapers, are two arms of the city embracing, in the middle, a subsystem of 3 towers. So Arcosanti, the 30th, the final Arcology contained in this book, was actually built or was used as a prototype for what went on to become the actual Arcosanti in Arizona, where Soleri lived and where several thousands of people have passed through over the years, spent time there, contributed to the community, contributed to the construction, gave their time and their efforts and their energies to building and maintaining the Arcology there, but also then learned lessons and learned skills that they could take back to their own communities. So it has been a learning laboratory. I will link to a documentary that was made by a woman who spent time there in its early days and then returned in 2014, the year after Soleri died, to interview some of the people there. It's a very interesting documentary. I think it's about half an hour. I will link that in the description box. And while you might look at Arcosanti and Arcology objectively and say that they've failed, that it's been 55 years now, and the model has not been adopted, aside from Arcosanti, despite the several thousands of devotees who have spent time there as interns and fellows and craftspeople, I do believe that some of these ideas, some of these images, some of these concepts have permeated our culture, and they're still filtering into urban planning and design, as well as our science fiction stories and our fantasies and our own extravaganzas. Also, 55 years in geologic time is just a blip. You know, perhaps centuries from now is when we as a culture will finally be ready or finally be desperately in need of something like an Arcology. I'd much rather see us building an Arcology than the current utopian boondoggle of planning some sort of exodus to Mars and colonizing Mars. I think that is much more far-fetched than just trying to build a functioning Arcology. Even, you know, just on the smaller scale like Arcosanti, I would much rather see us trying this in more environments, in more places, with more communities, than this very far-fetched idea of essentially doing the same thing, only in a hermetically sealed environment in a much more hostile place than what we have here on Earth. Soleri never claims that these designs are practical, quite the opposite. But he does point out that strict adherence to the practical is what has gotten us to this point, right? So if we're happy with that, then great. And unfortunately, I think we are happy with that as a culture. Look at the rise of McMansions. Look at the proliferation of gated communities, which are the quintessential suburban development. We're voting with our feet, or actually, we're voting with our cars. Entire cities are built around the centrality of the car. And making those cars electric doesn't change their destructiveness. It doesn't change the way that they scatter us and atomize us and encourage sprawl and require vast tracts of land to be paved for roads and parking, and still require vast amounts of energy to charge and run on. So I'll come down from my soapbox. This might be a good quote to end on. This is from Soleri, of course, and he writes, "The fruition of man is the creation of the never been before and never to be again." And while Arcologies obviously are not springing up around us as the recognized solution to what ails us, I do think that it's fair to say of Soleri's book and of his vision that it has never been before, and it is unlikely to be repeated. So I hope you've enjoyed this not-so-brief tour of an amazing book, Paolo Soleri's Arcology, The City in the Image of Man. If you did enjoy it, you got some value, you got some entertainment from it, please leave a like. Consider hitting subscribe. I will be putting more of these book tours out in the coming weeks and months. In fact, I've got one lined up for you right here. The best way to support the channel would be to take a look at one of my books. I will have links in the description box below. And that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one.